In this video, we'll just try to answer the question, what is a breadboard? A breadboard, also known as a proto board, which comes from the word prototyping, is just an easy way to temporarily connect things, to try things out, to prototype a circuit. And it's a very simple concept. You basically have little holes that you can insert components or wires into. Be careful if the component pin or wire is large, it can ruin the breadboard. So you have to be careful to have just the right size pins and or wires. 22 gauge wire is typically what breadboards are designed for. You have 5 little holes here that are all connected together. And then you have another 5 holes that are all connected together. And this is known as a node. So you have all these nodes, and they are simply 5 little holes that you can insert wires into or pins of a component, and they're all connected. So you have all these nodes down through here, and then you have another set of nodes or a whole bunch of rows that are connected, known as a node. And there's a node, there's another node, and so on. I mean, there are numbers to each node. I mean, there's a grid here if you wanted to specify, you know, where your connections are. I don't know that you always use that a whole lot, but I guess for documentation you could. But like I say, these are more temporary prototyping tools. So I don't know that you go that far where you actually use that. The other feature is what we would call bus, and it is simply this red line showing that all of these holes are all connected together. Occasionally you might run into a breadboard where they still stick with the 5 connected and then another 5, and they're isolated from each other. But that's, I think, more the exception than the rule. So you can use this red line to understand that all of these holes are connected all the way across there. And likewise, the blue stripe is showing you all of these holes are connected. You have 4 buses on this breadboard. And typically, that's where you're going to bring your power supply onto the board. You can see it's marked for you. Your positive side of your supply would go on the red line, negative side on the blue line. Follow that convention. Don't make life hard. There's always a few students that I'm amazed to see they've made life difficult for themselves. Somehow they put the negative here, the positive here, but they're like, I know that I did that. And I'm thinking, that's just another thing to have to remember. And when the circuit gets complicated, in the end, inevitably, they have trouble because they're trying to remember too many things. I mean, or they'll put like a black wire on the red bus and then the red wire on the blue, and I'm not sure why, and I always ask why. So, of course, I mean, maybe that sounds silly to even mention, but it happens, which is why I mention it. So stay organized, keep life simple for yourself. Red wire, positive side of the supply, goes to the red bus. Of course it does. And so I'll show you a couple examples of what we mean by connecting things, using a breadboard to put a little circuit together temporarily. So here might be an integrated circuit, and it's got pins. So I can just place that on the breadboard, and I'll push it down in a minute. But you can see this would be pin 1, and look, I have the ability to connect to pin 1. 4 different places I can use to connect to pin 1. So I could connect a resistor there, a wire there, a capacitor there, whatever I want, power there, whatever I want to do. I mean, because otherwise, what am I stuck with? I'm stuck with just a metal pin that I have to somehow hook a wire onto. Well, that's, why we have a breadboard. So I can just push it down in there. Make sure you push it down in straight. always be careful when you are inserting a component or a wire in the breadboard. Always be straight on. Things can bend and then it doesn't make a connection, and then you're left trying to find the one wire or pin that didn't quite connect properly. So there's my IC. It's sitting in there. If I want to connect to it, I can take a wire and let's say I need to connect positive power, you know, to pin 8, which would be sitting right here. So I need to get over to this red bus and just connect it across, and I would use 22 gauge solid wire, right? And we have wire strippers in your toolkit. These wire strippers, you would find the appropriate hole, the 22 gauge hole. I mean, if the wire strippers are more expensive, these holes for stripping are going to be pretty calibrated. I don't know that these are so calibrated. I see the 22, meaning 22 gauge. That might be a little bit small. So I'm going to probably use the 20 gauge hole, just looking at it, just eyeballing it. You'll get a feel for it. The goal of using strippers is to just cut off the plastic insulation, but not nick the copper. If these little sharp teeth, if they bite into the copper of the wire, they'll nick it, and that becomes an easy place for the wire to break, and it'll just break off. So you try not to nick the copper. So I'm going to put something like, let's see here, I'll use that 22 gauge hole, and I'll just do something like this and just pop that off. You see, and now I've got it stripped. Length is very important when you're doing wires for a breadboard. You need them to be long enough. You can see how long. It's just the thickness of the breadboard that we're looking at here. So if I go down the side of the breadboard, maybe pull that over for you. You see, I want it to be, you know, just as deep as the breadboard is, right? I don't want it to be too short. I won't make a good connection. I don't want it to be too long either, though, because if the wire that I'm inserting is too long, it can tunnel underneath and bump into another node. So it's very possible, if you're forcing a long wire that's spliced too long and forcing it in, it can curl underneath and start bumping into another adjacent node and shorting things out. When you're inserting the wire, you just want to be smooth about it. I mean, don't be clumsy with it. Just get it so that it's an easy insertion and the wire's straight. I know, again, these things sound so simple, but these are why students have problems. You know, they just aren't paying enough attention, and connectivity is more than half the battle in electronics. I noticed that wire, it's a little long, what I stripped there, the strip length, so I can always nip a little bit off if I want to. That's probably a better length. And because I saw some of the conductors still sticking out, but there we go. So now I just put that in. Notice when I insert the wire, I can pull it back out or put it in, and again, something so simple to mention, but that wire is nice and straight, and it's going in nice and easily, you know. So, I mean, I know these things seem ridiculously simple, but after 20 years of teaching electronics, most of the time students don't do well. It's these simple things. I'll show you an example. So here's somebody, and let's say, well, I'm going to do a couple examples for you. Okay, so I have seen this. This is usually what I see when I'm putting tool parts back from students that weren't successful in the course. And you know what I see? I'm reclaiming parts that they left behind, and I'm taking apart breadboards, and I'm pulling old wires off, and I'm pulling them off and going, oh, that's why their circuit was intermittent. That's why they couldn't do the lab test. You know, it's too short. It's not a good connection. So sometimes it was connecting, sometimes it wasn't. A little stubby connector as compared to the length you should have, which is See the difference, right? And that'll drive you crazy if you're getting intermittent connections. So that definitely needs to be longer, and we can fix that. And actually, let me show you another thing I have seen, which I know, again, you might or might not believe me, but 20 years of doing this, I mean, I can barely believe it too when I'm taking breadboards apart that were left behind. So there's like a long wire, right? And I don't want to abuse the breadboard this much, but look, it was like somebody wasn't being careful. You know, in the first place, look at that. Don't try to put that into your breadboard. It's already bent. It's just going to bend more, and then it's going to get jammed in there. And then you'll never know if you have a good connection or not, or if it even tunneled under. So again, I feel silly saying all these things, but this is the person who isn't paying attention while they're doing it. They're talking to their friend, or they're looking somewhere else, telling them about the weekend, and they're just trying to put this stupid circuit together that they don't care that much about anyway. And they take a wire, they strip it like this, whatever, who cares? Mr. Evans is that crazy perfectionist that I really don't buy into. And, you know, they're just talking to their friend and going, get in there, yeah, all right, I'll get this over here. And, you know, if I'm speaking for their brain, I've seen it. I mean, whether you believe me or not, but I've seen it. I'm with you. I can't believe it either, but okay. So it's there. So don't do that, right? And I mean, when I see stuff like that, I just feel like, oh, for goodness sakes. And then I can't even pull them out sometimes because they've tunneled under, and right now I'm pulling pretty hard on this thing, trying to pull this thing out. See why? I mean, that wire's all crumpled. Okay, so so none of us will do that. I hope. So back to our wire that was maybe stripped a little bit short. Let me get that a little bit longer, and we'll make our connection then, which is the positive side of the power supply being brought to pin 8 for that chip. And let's just drop it in here. Now look, right away, as you can see how straight those wires are. I think you can see. That's what you want. It takes maybe a few seconds more to do it right. And even if it takes 10 seconds more to do it right, you know how short that 10 seconds is compared to the 3 days that I see students spend trying to find the bad connection in their prototype circuit. So nice and straight, and that just inserts very easily. I mean, I could take it back out, it's still there, it's still straight. So now I have the positive side of my power supply nicely connected to pin 8 of my IC. So this is the prototyping board. This is what we're doing. Again, to review that, I mean, this whole bus is connected. This is all positive. And then this is a node, and the pin 8 of the chip, the IC, is on this node. So I can connect anywhere here. I'm just trying to be neat about it. Leave space here. Maybe I have to put a capacitor here also or something. But this node, these 5 holes, are all the same point electrically. So they're all connected. And you do have to get used to that concept. It's not a mechanical drawing. It's not architectural drawing. Electrically, this is all the same point, so it doesn't matter. Because I get that question too from students, and they ask me, well, which am I supposed to put it in? It doesn't matter. You're just trying to connect anywhere along the red bus to anywhere on this node, and you will have made the connection between the positive side of the supply and pin 8. Okay, if that makes sense. So sometimes I have to break people of that habit because they're frustrated because I haven't told them, you know, take the wire and connect it to A16, you know, like we were playing Battleship or something. It doesn't matter as long as you can use any node and any point on any node if it's getting the connection on the schematic that you need. And that's another point. When we have a schematic, that's an electrical drawing of the circuit. They're not literally copies of each other pictorially. So it's another thing for students to get used to. Some people adapt to that easily and quickly. Others find it very frustrating because the drawing on the schematic looks different than the layout on the breadboard. But do your best. I mean, make them as similar as you can. It helps you when you're probing the circuit with test equipment. It helps you stay oriented on your circuit. But they aren't identical. They're different things. There's the physical layout and there's the schematic layout. Both layouts are drawn, the schematics are made to look as neat as possible. So the schematic drawing is drawn so that the drawing looks neat, and the breadboard layout is built so that it is as neat as possible. So those are the general rules. Okay, I know that's a lot of talking for just having put one wire connected to one chip, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of neatness and organization. So that is a biggie. I'll add another component again just to help you see what this is all about. But here's a little push button, right? And we can it has just it's an SPST, normally open push button. If you don't know what that is, we'll be learning that real soon. Two little wires and switches, buttons. They're nothing fancy. They're just two pieces of metal that will be connected when you press on the top. So I mean, that's what those two wires are going to do. They're going to be connected when you press on the top. So here I would, if I wanted to put this on the breadboard to use it, I mean, again, I'm just trying to make it so that I can connect wires to these two pins of the push button. So I can pick a spot on the breadboard wherever I want. And I want to show you one thing, of course, but so here I could put it right in the middle if I wanted to of this grouping, and I think you can see each pin of that push button has its own node. It's another, I'll show you another classic mistake that students make. And again, it just goes in nice and easy. Everything's straight, and the insertion should not require much force. If it does, you're doing something wrong. So don't do it. Don't force it. Don't ever force the components onto the breadboard. If it's not going on easily, there's something wrong. So see, I mean, I take it off and look, the wires are still straight. Again, I know it's silly, but to say it, it seems silly, but it's what I see for 20 years. Lots. I see way too much of it, where things are just carelessly put in place, and then the evidence of that is when I'm taking them off, they're all crumpled and bent wires and so on. So see how easy it is? I can put that in and out all day long. It's not a problem. I'm not bending anything. I said each wire on that push button has its own node. Here's the mistake I see students making. They aren't paying attention to what they're doing, or they don't understand the breadboard fundamentally. Can you see what's wrong with this? I can put the push button on like this. I mean, physically I can do it. What's the problem? Put it in there. What have I done? And then people go ahead and they think, well, it's fine. I'll connect to one side of the push button here and the other side here. To see the problem, you're on the same node. The push buttons, pins are just connected to each other, and that connection, and that is also available here. But you just have a straight through connection. When you put a component on incorrectly like this, you do just short out the component. Remember, this is like node 8 here. These 5 holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are all connected. Okay. Those are all connected. So you've connected the push button to itself. You've shorted out the 2 pins, however you want to say it. So you have to always be thinking, of course, about the layout of the breadboard. Like we said at the very beginning, you just have rows upon rows of nodes, which are just simply groupings of 5 insert points that are all the same point electrically. They're all connected together. So don't put components on and short them out like that. Obviously, you're trying to get connections to these pins. So now, if I put it on correctly, I have one pin, you know, node 9, right? Node 9 is on one side of the switch, and it looks like node 7. Of course, you have to always check sometimes. Yeah, because there's a skip node in between. So that's some of the, you know, some of the stuff you have to get used to when you're using a breadboard. I mean, you insert the push button, and then you might have lost track of where those pins were because it kind of covers up, right? Covers up where the pins are. So you have to remember that maybe there was a space, a gap between the two pins of the push button. So nodes 7 and 9 would be where I'd be connecting. And again, it doesn't matter. You know, if I want to connect to one side of the push button, I can connect here or here. And if I want to connect to the other side, it's available here or here. Really doesn't matter at all. So if you were trying to decide, the decision is what makes for the neatest layout for the circuit physically. You know, here's available for the one side of the push button. Either one's fine. Absolutely doesn't matter. If you do have a component that has pins that are thicker than 22 gauge, this would be an example. I mean, this is a potentiometer, but you can insert this into a breadboard. I would not recommend it because what it's going to do is it's going to stretch out the insertion points wherever you do this. And then those insertion points won't be making as good of a connection to the 22 gauge wire or the pins of an IC or whatever. So you do tend to ruin the breadboard, you know, little by little if you take things, even though you can get them to fit into the breadboard, you've stretched out those holes. Maybe I can put this on and show you. You'll know it if you're trying to put something on that's maybe not the right, it's too thick. Yeah, so it just takes a lot of force to get it on, first of all. And this one's close. I mean, you could almost get away with it. If you knew it was going to stay there forever, you could leave it there because it might have made good connection for itself, but it'll ruin those insert points maybe for other things. Do you see what I've done? I've pretty much stretched those out, haven't I? See that? And you can't see the little metal clip anymore. You've kind of pushed it and stretched it apart. You see how there's a nice tight metal clip in there that'll grab onto the wire? Where is it? So that could be an intermittent connection. So so be careful with just putting any old thing on your breadboard. High wattage resistors or some kind of a panel mount potentiometer. These are things that will compromise those insert points. They kind of stretch them out and make them suspicious whether they're going to connect very well in the future. Sometimes components are just barely long enough in terms of their pins. I mean, we'll be using some components like this little PC mount relay. It's meant to be soldered onto a PC board, and it is breadboard friendly, but I would say just barely. So sometimes you always have to be aware of that too. If you take, you know, what's meant to be soldered onto a PC board, you can see I think those pins are long enough, but not just barely long enough, not by any too much. So, I mean, like, look at the side view here. This always tells you how friendly a component is to a breadboard. I haven't really pressed down to make any kind of insertion into the breadboard. And look, that is all the connectivity I have. I have like maybe a 1/16 of an inch. That's not ideal, but it works. But you kind of have to always be suspicious of it, I would say. I mean, I would like to have those leads be a 1/4 inch long where I can really get, or more, but where I can really get down into the breadboard. But here, watch, I'm gonna press this. I'm gonna finish pressing the relay into the breadboard, and it doesn't go much. Ready? There. That's all I get. That's all I get. So I get about a 1/16 of an inch connectivity, which works. for maybe some demonstrations. But yeah, when I'm working with stuff like this, I'm always aware that if I feel like I have some intermittent problem with connections, this will be the first place I would suspect, right here, because it just doesn't have much connectivity. So there's problems on both sides. If you have too large of pins, they can tend to ruin the breadboard. Too small, and you won't get the connection reliability that you need. And I just thought of another little trick. We are going to be using these lamps in the very beginning. They're called bi-pin lamps, and they're breadboard friendly, but the length of the leads is great, but the pin spacing is it's a little tricky. They're a little wide for going node to node, so you can do it. I mean, if I can show you here, you can push them into adjacent nodes just like that, but you'll be kind of challenged, and the LED might try to, the lamp might try to pop out. So actually what we found is go sort of on a diagonal, and you'll get just exactly the distancing you need between those leads. You're still going on adjacent nodes. Do you see that? So these are little tricks. If the component you're using, if the pin spacing is just a little off from what the breadboard spacing is, sometimes you can do tricks like this and go diagonally, and again, the rule is it should insert easily. And it inserts very easily, and it stays there. But that's because I used sort of that little diagonal trick. Yeah, as opposed to just straight across. Straight across, you can get it to work. It's just you really have to wiggle it and bend those leads. So, again, it kind of illustrates this whole breadboarding topic of you can see you need to be paying attention to what you're doing. A less experienced breadboardist would probably just be fine just there, but you can do better. You can feel that it's a little easier on the component. It's not stressing it out. Just do that little trick. So. And just to wrap it up, I have this breadboard with clear plastic. It just helps you literally see what we said from the very beginning. How the nodes, it is just one piece of metal. If you can see the shiny metal through, this is clear plastic, and then here's the shiny metal, right? Just tying these 5 together, and then there's another common piece of metal, and they have like little leaves that grab the wire that you insert in there, but those are called nodes. You can see over here on the bus, take the red bus, you can see, maybe you can see the shiny metal connecting all this, and then there is a little piece of metal here that just keeps going, so they're all tied together. And maybe that helps reinforce visually what we said about the breadboard, which really is the whole story of the breadboard. It's not a complicated piece. It's just lots of little things that made the video longer because of the little tricks that are very important. But yeah, the breadboard itself, it don't make it complicated. It is only that. It's and maybe if I tilt it on the edge, you can even see. You can see again. I think you can see what you're looking at. The mechanics kind of show themselves. You can see that's a group of 5. Now, of course, it's on the bus, so these are tied together. But And then here on the long view, you can see the individual nodes, right? They're just groups of 5 insert points. And from the side view, you can see the 5 places that are there ready to grab a wire or a pin. But the bottom of these is a common piece of metal, so it's tying all that together. Okay, maybe that helps. We'll do other videos when it comes to actually setting up our breadboards. But okay, breadboards are just metal and plastic. There's no magic dust in there.